He won a ranch in a poker game, but a girl who refused to leave came with it. Jack Morrison had never been a gambling man. Not really. Sure, he'd played a few hands of poker here and there over the years, mostly to pass the time in lonely bunkhouses after long days of herding cattle. But on that sweltering August evening in 1952, something drew him into that run-down saloon just outside Amarillo, Texas. Maybe it was the heat that had been pressing down on him all day as he hitchhiked along the dusty highway. Maybe it was the fact that his pockets held only $17 and some loose change, barely enough to get him through another week. Or maybe it was just fate, though Jack had stopped believing in fate a long time ago. The saloon wasn't much to look at. Paint peeled from the wooden exterior, and the sign above the door hung crooked, creaking in the hot wind. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey. A handful of men sat scattered around the room, nursing their drinks and their troubles. Jack ordered a beer with some of his precious remaining dollars and found a seat in the corner, content to observe and rest his tired feet. That's when he noticed the poker game happening at a round table near the back. 5 men sat hunched over their cards, their faces showing various degrees of concentration, frustration, and careful blankness. Jack recognized the type immediately. These were working men, ranch hands and drifters like himself, playing for small stakes to break up the monotony of their hard lives, all except one man. Clayton Hewitt stuck out like a sore thumb among the others. While they wore worn work shirts and dusty jeans, Hewitt had on what must have once been an expensive suit, now rumpled and stained. His silver hair was uncombed, his face flushed red from drinking, and his hands shook slightly as he reached for his glass. Even from across the room, Jack could see the desperation in the older man's eyes. "We need another player," one of the men at the table called out, noticing Jack watching. "You know how to play 5-card draw?" Jack hesitated. He really couldn't afford to lose what little money he had. But something about the scene pulled at him. Besides, he'd been alone on the road for so long that even the company of strangers around a card table felt appealing. He finished his beer, grabbed his worn duffel bag, and walked over to join them. The first few hands were unremarkable. The stakes were small, just a few dollars here and there. Jack played conservatively, folding more often than not, trying to get a feel for the other players. The ranch hands were straightforward, easy to read. But Clayton Hewitt was a different story. The old man played recklessly, betting big on weak hands, his judgment clearly clouded by whatever demons were chasing him and whatever was in his glass. As the evening wore on and the sun disappeared completely outside the grimy windows, Hewitt's pile of chips dwindled steadily. He ordered drink after drink, his words becoming slurred, his movements less coordinated. The other players started to look uncomfortable. This wasn't fun anymore. They were watching a man self-destruct. Maybe you should call it a night, Clayton," one of the ranch hands suggested gently. "Sleep it off and start fresh tomorrow." "Mind your own business," Hewitt snapped, his words thick. "Deal the cards." Jack had seen men like this before during his 3 years of drifting, men who'd lost something important and were trying to lose everything else too, as if complete destruction might somehow be easier than partial loss. He'd nearly become one of himself. After the drought of 1949 turned his family's Oklahoma farm into a dust bowl, his parents had lost everything they'd worked for over 30 years. His father's heart gave out that winter, and his mother followed 6 months later. Some people said she died of pneumonia, but Jack knew better. She died of her broken heart and broken dreams. After that, Jack couldn't stay in Oklahoma. Everywhere he looked, he saw ghosts and dust and failure, so he'd packed a bag and started moving, working cattle ranches across Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado. He was good at the work, strong and reliable, but he never stayed anywhere long. He couldn't afford to put down roots, couldn't risk caring about something that might be taken away. Now, watching Clayton Hewitt destroy himself over a card game, Jack felt an uncomfortable recognition. There but for the grace of God, he thought. The turning point came around 11 o'clock. Hewitt had lost almost everything. His chips were nearly gone, and he'd already emptied his wallet onto the table. The other players were ready to end the game, counting their modest winnings and preparing to leave, but Hewitt stopped them. "One more hand," he said, his voice suddenly hard and clear despite the alcohol. "One more hand and I'm done." "Clayton, you got nothing left to bet with," one of the men pointed out. Hewitt reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. His hands trembled as he smoothed it out on the table. Even in the dim light of the saloon, Jack could see it was an official document of some kind. "Silver Creek Ranch," Hewitt announced. 800 acres of prime grazing land, a main house, barn, 3 outbuildings, and water rights to Silver Creek itself. It's Worth $50,000 easy, maybe more. I'm putting it all in the pot." The table went silent. The other players stared at the deed, then at each other, then at Hewitt. This had gone from a friendly card game to something else entirely. "Clayton, you can't be serious," someone said. "That's your home. That's your granddaughter's home." At the mention of his granddaughter, something flickered across Hewitt's face. Pain, guilt, shame. But he pushed it away and took another drink. "My ranch, my choice," he said. "You boys in or out?" 3 of the players immediately folded and left the table, wanting no part of what was happening. That left only Jack and one other ranch hand, a weathered man named Pete who looked deeply troubled. "This ain't right," Pete said, shaking his head. "I'm out too." Jack knew he should leave as well. This was madness. A man gambling away his home, his legacy, his granddaughter's future. But Jack looked at the deed lying on the table and felt something stir inside him that he thought had died with his parents. Hope, possibility, a chance at something permanent, something real. He counted what was left of his money. $17 wasn't nearly enough to match the value of a ranch, but in the strange logic of this desperate game, it didn't seem to matter. Hewitt wasn't looking for a fair trade. He was looking for an ending. "I'm in," Jack heard himself say. The cards were dealt. Jack picked up his hand and kept his face carefully neutral, a skill he'd learned over many lonely nights in many forgotten towns. 3 kings stared back at him. It was a strong hand, one of the best he'd been dealt all night. Hewitt asked for 2 cards. Jack took 2 as well, hoping to improve his hand, but knowing the 3 kings might be enough. When he looked at his new cards, his heart jumped. He'd drawn a 4th king and a useless 7. 4 of a kind. It was a hand that would win most games, but he kept his expression blank, gave nothing away. Hewitt bet everything, pushing the deed into the center of the table with shaking hands. Jack matched the bet with his remaining dollars and some coins. "Call," he said quietly. Hewitt laid down his cards with something almost like relief. A pair of aces and nothing else. A decent hand under normal circumstances, but not tonight. Jack spread his 4 kings on the table. For a long moment, nobody moved or spoke. The bartender had stopped wiping glasses. The few remaining customers in the saloon had gathered around to watch. Everyone understood they were witnessing something significant, a moment that would be talked about for years to come. Clayton Hewitt stared at the cards, then at the deed, then at Jack. His face cycled through emotions too quickly to track. Anger, defeat, relief, despair. Finally, he stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "It's yours," he said, his voice hollow. "The ranch is yours." He walked out of the saloon without another word, disappearing into the hot Texas night. The remaining men congratulated Jack uncertainly, as if they weren't sure whether to celebrate or offer condolences. Jack picked up the deed with hands that had suddenly started shaking. The paper felt impossibly heavy, weighted with responsibility and possibility and the ruins of another man's life. He left the saloon shortly after and found a boarding house where he rented a small room for the night, but sleep wouldn't come. He lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, the deed on the nightstand beside him. Jack Morrison, who had owned nothing but a duffel bag of clothes and $17 that morning, now owned an 800-acre ranch. He thought about his parents, about the farm they'd lost, about the dreams that had dried up and blown away with the Oklahoma topsoil. He thought about the last 3 years of wandering, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. And he thought about Clayton Hewitt, walking alone into the darkness, and the granddaughter he'd mentioned, the one who apparently lived on the ranch Jack now owned. As dawn broke and light crept through the thin curtains, Jack finally admitted to himself what he'd known since the moment he'd said "call" at that poker table. His life had just changed completely. Whether it had changed for better or worse, only time would tell. But one thing was certain. He couldn't go back to drifting now. The road had led him here, to this moment, to this impossible stroke of luck or fate or whatever you wanted to call it. He had won a ranch in a poker game. Now he had to figure out what to do with it. Jack spent the next 3 days preparing for his journey to Silver Creek Ranch. He used a few dollars to buy some basic supplies and hitched rides with truckers heading in the right direction. The deed to the ranch stayed folded in his shirt pocket, pressed close to his chest. He checked for it constantly, still half convinced that it might disappear or that someone would tell him there'd been a terrible mistake. The local county office confirmed that the deed was legitimate. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, had looked at him with a mixture of pity and curiosity when he'd asked about transferring ownership. She'd heard about the poker game, of course. News traveled fast in these parts. She processed the paperwork without comment, though Jack caught her shaking her head slightly as she stamped the documents. On the morning of the fourth day, Jack stood at the end of a long dirt road with a weathered wooden sign that read Silver Creek Ranch. His duffel bag felt heavier than usual on his shoulder, or maybe that was just the weight of anticipation and nervousness pressing down on him. He'd walked the last 5 miles from where the truck driver had dropped him off, and the August sun was already fierce despite the early hour. The road stretched ahead of him, bordered by fence lines that had definitely seen better days. Posts leaned at odd angles, wire sagged between them, and in some places the fence had collapsed entirely. Jack's experienced eye took it all in with growing concern. Fixing fences was expensive, time-consuming work. Still, he reminded himself, the land itself looked decent. The grass was brown from the summer heat, but it wasn't dead. Come fall rains, this could be good grazing land. As he walked, he tried to imagine what the ranch house would look like. In his mind, he'd been picturing something modest but solid, maybe a bit run down, but nothing he couldn't fix up over time. He'd worked on enough ranches to know his way around basic carpentry and repairs. Whatever state the place was in, he'd make it work. He had to. This was his chance, maybe his only chance, at having something of his own again. The road curved, and suddenly the main compound came into view. Jack stopped walking, his stomach sinking. The reality was worse than he'd let himself imagine. The barn listed to one side, its red paint faded to a dusty pink and peeling in long strips. One of the large doors hung crooked on its hinges. Several smaller outbuildings were in various states of decay, and what looked like it might have once been a chicken coop was now just a pile of collapsed wood. The main house was a 2-story structure that must have been impressive once. It had a wide front porch with decorative railings and tall windows that would let in plenty of light. But the porch sagged in the middle, several windows were cracked, and the whole place needed paint desperately. Weeds grew tall in what had probably been a garden, and an old truck sat rusting in the yard, weeds growing up through its wheel wells. Jack felt his dreams deflating, but forced himself to focus on the positives. The house had good bones, he could see that. The roof looked mostly intact, which was important. With work, a lot of work, this place could be brought back to life. He shifted his duffel bag to his other shoulder and started walking again, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. He was about 50 yards from the house when he saw her. A young woman stood on the front porch, and she was holding a shotgun, not pointing it at him exactly, but holding it in a way that made it clear she knew how to use it and wasn't afraid to do so. Jack stopped walking immediately, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "That's far enough," the woman called out. Her voice was strong, clear, with no tremor or fear in it. "State your business." "My name is Jack Morrison," he called back, keeping his hands visible. "I'm looking for Silver Creek Ranch. You found it. Now you can turn around and leave." Jack studied her from this distance. She was young, probably still in her teens, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans and a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and her stance was solid, confident. This wasn't some frightened girl playing at being tough. This was someone who'd learned to take care of herself. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Jack said carefully. "I own this ranch. I have the deed right here." He slowly reached toward his shirt pocket. "Don't move," she snapped, and now the shotgun did rise slightly. "I know exactly who you are and what happened. You're the drifter who took advantage of a drunk old man in a card game. Well, congratulations on your win. You got yourself 800 acres of land. But this house is mine, and I'm not leaving." Jack's mind raced. Clayton Hewitt's granddaughter. Of course. He should have expected this, should have thought about what it would mean that someone was already living here. But he'd been so caught up in his own good fortune that he hadn't really considered the human cost. "Look," he said, trying to keep his voice calm and reasonable, "I understand this is your home, but legally the entire property belongs to me now. The house, the land, everything. Your grandfather signed it over." "My grandfather was drunk out of his mind and has been for the better part of 2 years," she shot back. "That signature isn't worth the paper it's on. The county office says different. They verified the deed and transferred ownership to me 3 days ago." They stared at each other across the dusty yard. Jack could see the frustration and anger in her posture, but underneath it, he sensed something else. Fear, maybe, or desperation. She was protecting the only home she had, and he couldn't entirely blame her for that. "What's your name?" he asked, deciding to try a different approach. She hesitated, then answered. "Elena. Elena Hewitt." "Elena, I'm not here to throw you out on the street. I'm just here to claim what's mine. Maybe we can work something out." "Work something out?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to work something out? Fine. Here's what we're going to work out. You can have the land. Run your cattle, fix your fences. Do whatever you want out there, but this house stays mine. I was born in this house. My mother died in this house. My grandfather raised me here, and I've been taking care of this place since I was 14 years old. You're not taking it from me." Jack felt his own frustration building. He'd won this property fair and square. Well, maybe not entirely fair given Clayton's condition, but legally it was his. He'd spent 3 years with nothing, sleeping in bunkhouses and cheap motels, owning nothing but the clothes on his back. And now, when he finally had a chance at something permanent, this girl with a shotgun was telling him he couldn't have it. "I paid for this property," he said, his voice hardening. "With everything I had. I'm not sleeping in a barn while you live in my house." "Then I guess you've got a problem," Elena replied. "Because I'm not leaving, and that shotgun says I don't have to." They stood in standoff, neither willing to back down. Jack considered his options. He could go back to town, get the sheriff involved, force her out legally. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the memory of his own mother, losing her home and dying of a broken heart. Maybe it was recognition of the same stubborn survival instinct that had kept him going through 3 hard years. Or maybe he was just tired of fighting. "There's a bunkhouse?" he asked finally. Elena seemed surprised by the question. "What? A bunkhouse?" For ranch hands. "Is there one on the property?" "Yeah, behind the barn. It's not much." "Nothing here is," Jack muttered. "All right, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to stay in the bunkhouse tonight. Tomorrow we're going to sit down like reasonable adults and figure this out. Because like it or not, we're both stuck here now." He didn't wait for her response, just picked up his duffel bag and walked past the house toward the barn. He kept his movements slow and non-threatening, very aware of the shotgun still in Elena's hands. She didn't shoot him, which he took as a positive sign. The bunkhouse was exactly what he'd expected. A long, narrow building with 6 metal frame beds, a pot-bellied stove, and not much else. It was dusty and filled with cobwebs, clearly unused for years, but it had a roof that didn't leak and walls that kept out the wind. Jack had stayed in worse places. He dropped his duffel bag on the bed nearest the door and sat down heavily. The springs creaked under his weight. Through the grimy window, he could see the main house in the distance. This wasn't how he'd imagined his first day as a ranch owner would go. As the sun set and darkness crept across the property, Jack lay on the uncomfortable bed and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in the main house, Elena Hewitt was probably doing the same thing, both of them wondering how this impossible situation was going to resolve itself. Jack had won a ranch in a poker game, that much was true, but he was starting to realize that winning and actually possessing something were 2 very different things. And the biggest obstacle to his dream wasn't the broken fences or the sagging barn or the years of neglect. It was a 19-year-old girl with a shotgun and nothing left to lose. Tomorrow, he thought, they'd figure something out. They had to, because neither of them was leaving, and this ranch wasn't big enough for a war. Jack woke with the sunrise, his body stiff from the uncomfortable bunkhouse bed. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then reality came flooding back. He owned a ranch now, though he was sleeping in the workers' quarters while a stubborn young woman occupied the main house. He sat up, rubbed his face, and decided that today would be different. Today, he'd start acting like a ranch owner, whether Elena Hewitt liked it or not. He walked to the outdoor pump near the barn and worked the handle until cold water gushed out. He splashed his face, the shock of cold helping to clear his head. The morning air was already warming up, promising another scorching day. As he stood there, water dripping from his chin, he surveyed his property with fresh eyes. Yes, it was run down. Yes, it needed work. But it was his, and he was going to make something of it. Jack spent the morning walking the property, taking mental notes of everything that needed attention. The list grew longer with every step. The barn roof had several holes that would need patching before winter. The corral fences were in terrible shape. The water trough had a crack in it. One of the outbuildings had a door hanging by a single hinge. It was overwhelming, but Jack had learned long ago that the only way to tackle big problems was one small piece at a time. Around mid-morning, he noticed something that made him pause. On the front porch of the main house, someone had left a tin cup of coffee and a biscuit wrapped in cloth. He approached cautiously, half expecting Elena to appear with her shotgun again, but the porch remained empty. The coffee was still warm. He picked up the cup, inhaling the rich aroma. It had been days since he'd had decent coffee. Jack sat on the porch steps, sipping the coffee and eating the biscuit. It was a simple meal, but after days of whatever he could afford from roadside diners, it tasted wonderful. He wondered what this gesture meant. Was Elena softening, or was this just basic hospitality that had nothing to do with their standoff? He decided not to overthink it. He finished his breakfast, left the cup and cloth neatly on the porch rail, and went back to his assessment of the property. By noon, the heat was oppressive. Jack found some old tools in the barn, rusty but usable, and started working on the corral fence. It was hot, dirty work, but it felt good to be doing something productive. He'd been drifting for so long, moving from one temporary job to another, never building anything that would last. Now, every post he straightened, every wire he tightened, was an investment in his own future. He was so focused on his work that he didn't hear Elena approach until she spoke. "You're doing it wrong." Jack looked up, startled. She stood a few feet away, no shotgun this time, her arms crossed over her chest. Up close and in daylight, he could see she was probably 19 or 20, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and sun-darkened skin from years of outdoor work. "Excuse me?" he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "That post, you're setting it too shallow. First good storm, it'll lean right over again. You need to go down at least 2 feet, maybe 2.5 in this soil." Jack looked at the post he just set, then back at Elena. Part of him wanted to argue, to assert his authority as the owner. But another part, the practical part that had kept him employed on a dozen different ranches, recognized expertise when he heard it. "Show me," he said simply. Something flickered in Elena's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. She stepped forward and knelt by the post hole he'd been digging. "The soil here is mostly clay under the topsoil. It shifts when it gets wet. You need to go deeper and pack it tighter. And see this?" She pointed to the post itself. "The bottom's not treated. It'll rot within 2 years. There's treated lumber in the back of the barn, left over from repairs my grandfather started but never finished." They worked in silence for a while, Elena showing him the right depth and technique, Jack following her instructions. Despite the heat and the awkwardness of their situation, there was something satisfying about working together toward a common goal. The fence needed fixing, regardless of who owned the property or who lived in the house. "Thank you for the coffee this morning," Jack said as they moved to the next post.
Elena shrugged.
"You looked hungry. I'm not heartless, just practical." "This place needs a lot of work," Jack observed, gesturing at the ranch around them. "I know. I've been trying to keep it together by myself for 2 years." There was exhaustion in her voice and maybe a hint of defeat. "My grandfather used to be different. Before my grandmother died, he ran this ranch like it was his kingdom. Best operation in the county. But when Grandma passed 3 years ago, something broke in him. He started drinking, stopped caring. I did what I could, but I was still in school, and then I had to get jobs in town to pay for food and basic supplies. The ranch just fell apart around us." Jack listened, understanding more now about the situation he'd walked into. "Where is your grandfather now?" "I don't know. He hasn't been back since that poker game. Part of me wants to hunt him down and tell him what a fool he was. Another part," she trailed off, her jaw tight. "Another part what?" "Another part of me is relieved he's gone." "Is that terrible?" Jack thought about his own complicated feelings toward his father, who'd worked himself to death trying to save a farm that couldn't be saved. "No, it's honest." They continued working through the afternoon. Elena disappeared around 2 o'clock and returned with sandwiches and cold water from the well house. They ate sitting on an overturned water trough, seeking shade from the relentless sun. "So what's your plan?" Elena asked, biting into her sandwich. "You're a drifter who won a ranch in a card game. Do you even know how to run a place like this?" "I've worked cattle ranches for 10 years, Jack replied, not taking offense. "I know the work. What I don't know is the business side, dealing with buyers, managing finances, all that. And I suppose you expect me to just teach you everything and then move on? I expect that we need to figure out an arrangement that works for both of us." Elena studied him for a long moment. "Why didn't you just get the sheriff to throw me out?" "You have the legal right," Jack had asked himself the same question, "because I know what it's like to lose your home. And because throwing you out would make me the kind of man I don't want to be." "How noble," Elena said, but her tone was less sharp than before. "It's not noble. It's practical. You know this ranch, you know the land, you know the community. I'm an outsider with a piece of paper. We'd both be better off working together than fighting each other. So what are you proposing?" Jack had been thinking about this since last night. "You stay in the main house. I'll stay in the bunkhouse for now. We work the ranch together, split the labor and the decisions. When we start making money, we figure out fair compensation for both of us. And when you decide you don't need me anymore, then we put something in writing, a contract that protects both of us." Elena was quiet, considering. Jack could see the wheels turning in her head, weighing options, calculating risks. She was smart, he realized. Not just ranch smart, but genuinely intelligent. What happened that night? She asked suddenly. At the poker game. Was my grandfather really that drunk? Jack nodded slowly. He was, but there was something else too. He seemed almost relieved to lose, like he'd been looking for a way out and finally found it. Elena's expression crumpled for just a moment before she regained control. He gave up. On the ranch, on me, on everything. She stood abruptly, brushing crumbs from her jeans. We should get back to work. That fence isn't going to fix itself. They worked until dusk, accomplishing more together than Jack could have alone. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Elena headed back to the main house while Jack returned to the bunkhouse. But before she disappeared inside, she turned back. Jack? He stopped, looking at her across the yard. I don't trust you yet, and I haven't forgiven my grandfather for what he did. But maybe we can make this work. Just don't make me regret giving you a chance. Same to you, Jack called back. That night, lying in the bunkhouse, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not quite hope, not yet, but possibility. The ranch was a mess, his living situation was bizarre, and he was in an uneasy partnership with a young woman who'd held a shotgun on him just yesterday. But they'd worked together today. They'd fixed fence posts and talked honestly and maybe, just maybe, found a path forward. Through the window he could see lights on in the main house. Elena was probably planning tomorrow's work, or maybe she was thinking about her grandfather and all the ways her life had gone wrong. Jack understood that feeling intimately. As sleep finally came, Jack's last thought was that winning the ranch had been the easy part. Building something from the ruins, earning Elena's trust, and proving he was worthy of this second chance, that was going to be the real challenge. But for the first time since his parents died, Jack felt ready to try. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Tomorrow they'd work on the barn roof, and the day after, maybe the broken water trough. One repair at a time, one day at a time, they'd bring Silver Creek Ranch back to life. Together.